Noguchi testified that the fatal shot was fired from a distance of less than 1 inch from the back of Senator Kennedy's right ear. And since eyewitnesses in the pantry of the Ambassador Hotel basically placed Saran anywhere from 3 to 11 feet in front of Senator Kennedy, it's problematic as to how he could have fired a shot from less than 1 inch from the back of his head when he was standing 3 to 11 feet in front of him. If you can figure that out, please let us know.
Indeed. There's a lot of discussion about witnesses not seeing things quite right the way that they happen, and divergence in testimony. Certainly there was divergence in the testimony of the witnesses. However, that was due to Sirhan thrashing around in the arms of the people who grabbed him as he was firing the shots. But not a single witness, and several placed him up as close as 3 or 4 feet, not a single witness of some 20 or 30 interviewed had him anywhere near enough to Robert F. Kennedy to fire that fatal shot.
The majority placed him about 7 or 8 feet in front of Senator Kennedy.
Now, some things came up later, which, again, we're not going to go into the whole Robert F. Kennedy assassination tonight, but among other things, there were bullet holes and bullet wounds to be accounted for to the number of about 10 bullets. Unfortunately, Sirhan was only carrying a revolver that fired 8 bullets. One of the ways that this was dealt with by the Los Angeles Police Department and the Special Unit Senator Task Force in their inimitable way was to take all of the wood siding of the walls and the door frames that had bullet holes in it and take them out and burn them before the investigation was completed.
They also disposed of a sleeve from Robert Kennedy's jacket, which might have provided evidence as to the direction of the bullets. It's worth noting, Nip mentioned that the investigation of Robert Kennedy's assassination was conducted by a special unit of the Los Angeles Police Department called Special Unit Senator. Now, the 2 top operatives in Special Unit Senator just happened to be 2 Los Angeles policemen named Manny Pena and Enrique Hernandez. And both of these men had not only worked for the LAPD, but they had worked for the Central Intelligence Agency in Central and South America, and specifically had worked in conjunction with a man named Dan Mitrione in connection with the Office of Public Assistance. Well, basically, it was ostensibly to help the police forces of Latin America modernize. What Mitrione was really doing was teaching torture to various, specifically the Brazilian and Uruguayan governments in Latin America. And these 2 associates of his headed up Special Unit Senator. And it's worth noting, too, that the top suspect, the primary suspect of the person who really fired the shots was a man named Thane Eugene Caesar, who was posing as a security, well, actually was working as a security guard in the Ambassador Hotel that night. He had formerly worked for Lockheed at its Burbank facility, which is closely affiliated with the U-2 project. And he had a gun, very much, in fact, the exact same kind of .22 caliber Ivor Johnson automatic that Saran fired, and lied about when he had gotten rid of it. There's a very famous picture of Robert Kennedy as he lies dying, and there's a young Chicano boy who's sort of cradling his head and looking up. If you look by Robert Kennedy's right hand, there's a clip-on tie which is lying on the floor by his right hand, and in many photographs of Thane Caesar, his clip-on tie is missing. And I believe it was a CBS, possibly an NBC reporter, did actually testify that a security guard was firing shots in the pantry of the Ambassador Hotel. So keep in mind Thane Eugene Caesar, because he's an interesting fellow, and last report he was coordinating Klan and Nazi Party activities down in Southern California. Anyway, that all is to give you an idea of just what actually happened with the Robert Kennedy assassination.
And it leads us to the supposition put forward by some people that if, in fact, the assassination was perpetrated, to use police language, from the rear by a real assassin, that Sirhan was perhaps nothing more than a decoy. And that, in fact, if he was a decoy, that he was the best kind of decoy, which is a decoy that didn't realize what he was doing, perhaps because of some kind of hypnotic or drug programming.
And it's worth noting, too, that he has been portrayed as a lone nut with no political connections. Now, it's worth noting that the Saran family's entry into the United States was sponsored by a family who were very close friends and political allies of Richard Nixon. Now, Richard Nixon, of course, won the presidency in 1968. Had Robert Kennedy not been assassinated, it would have been Robert Kennedy, since he had just wrapped up the Democratic nomination by winning the California primary. It would have been Robert Kennedy and not Hubert Horatio Humphrey, who went against Richard Nixon, and most observers agree that Senator Kennedy would have beaten Richard Nixon rather handily. Recall that Humphrey barely edged him out, and a little later we're going to talk about some other interesting people and organizations with whom Saran intersects. But keep in mind that his family's entry into the United States was sponsored by close friends and political allies of Richard Nixon.
All right. Now, in the early days of the, as a matter of fact, in the very first day of the investigation of the murder of Robert F. Kennedy, there was a particularly interesting discovery made, which was later used as basically being the final nail in the coffin of Sirhan Sirhan as far as his legal defense went. This, again, is from Operation Mind Control by Walter Boert, and I'm going to read to you from that. On the floor next to Sirhan's bed was a large spiral notebook. On the desk was another notebook. There was a third small notebook, a good deal of occult literature, a brochure advertising a book on mental projection, and a large brown envelope from the Internal Revenue Service on which someone had written, "RFK must be disposed of like his brother was." At the bottom of the envelope was scrawled, "Reactionary." In one of the notebooks there was a page which was used later in the trial to prove premeditation. Quote, May 18th. 9:45 a.m., 68. Of course, 1968 was the year in which Kennedy was killed. It was June 5th, so this was supposed to have been about 20 days before the assassination. My determination, the notebook reads, to eliminate RFK is becoming more of an unshakable obsession. RFK must die. RFK must be killed. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated. RFK must be assassinated. RFK must be assassinated. No punctuation between those. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated before 5 June 68. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated. I have never heard, please pay to the order of this or that. Please pay to the order of. Also drawn on the page were spirals, diamonds, and doodles.
Okay. The next passage here, now we're going to continue a little later in the Operation Mind Control by Walter Boert. We're going to tell you a little bit about someone named the Girl in the Polka Dot Dress and present you with some other anomalies about the Robert Kennedy assassination.
Okay, skipping along in Operation Mind Control. The chief counsel for the Los Angeles chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, A.L. Wirin, spelled W-I-R-I-N, went to Sirhan's defense within hours of his arrest. On his second meeting with the accused, Wirin brought the local papers with him. Sirhan read the headline, Kennedy's dead. Then he dropped his head in grief. After fighting to control his emotions, he looked at Wirin through tearful eyes and said, quote, Mr. Wirin, I'm a failure. I believe in love, and instead of showing love... Then Wirin recalled, quote, he muttered something about having betrayed his own primary beliefs. That night, Sirhan complained of being sick. He became very dizzy and had severe stomach cramps, just as Castillo and Candy Jones. By the way, just inserting here, Castillo we already talked about. At the end of last show, Candy Jones is coming up. For several weeks, Sirhan was given a half grain of phenobarbital at night to help him sleep. The Los Angeles police went through the motions of looking into the possibility that a conspiracy was behind the RFK assassination. They looked for the girl in the polka dot dress, who witnesses said had been standing next to Sirhan, smiling and talking to him just before he began shooting in the pantry. Sirhan also said he'd been talking to the girl after he'd drunk several Tom Collinses. The girl in the polka dot dress was not found, and conflicting statements cast doubt on whether there had ever been such a girl. 45, quote, top men from the Los Angeles Police Department were assigned the job of tracking down all leads to a conspiracy, but incredibly, they came up empty-handed. A bag of women's clothing, which included a polka dot dress and new undergarments, was found by the LAPD in an alley, but police could not find out who'd brought them or who'd worn them. According to Sirhan's biographer, Robert Blair Kaiser, quote, the police and FBI hardly did all they could to find the owner of the polka dot dress. They used faulty logic and browbeat witnesses to eliminate the girl in the polka dot dress. To penetrate Sirhan's amnesia, the defense decided to call in an expert hypnotist, Dr. Bernard L. Diamond of the University of California. Diamond was the Associate Dean of UCLA's School of Criminology and a professor of both law and psychiatry. No one knew more about law, psychiatry, and hypnosis than Diamond.
Now, before we tell you more here about Professor Diamond, remember that Sirhan, who supposedly now had assassinated Robert Kennedy, appeared to be very grief-stricken and dumbfounded when informed that Robert Kennedy was dead. He also reacted in a very similar fashion not only to Mr. Castillo, possibly involved in the assassination of John Kennedy, as we looked at in the first broadcast, but also behaved in a fashion very similar to Candy Jones, a CIA mind control courier who we're going to talk about later in the broadcast. Continuing now with Bernard Diamond, and the section of Walter Bowert's book we're going to deal with now basically indicates that in all probability Bernard Diamond had hypnotized Sirhan Sirhan and under hypnosis convinced Sirhan that he did in fact kill Senator Kennedy, whereas the physical evidence would indicate that he could not have killed Senator Kennedy, and his reaction upon learning of Senator Kennedy's death certainly indicates that he harbored no malice against RFK. Continuing now with Operation Mind Control. In a pre-hypnosis interview, Diamond asked Sirhan to tell him about his notebooks, and Sirhan said he couldn't recall writing them. Now recall, those are the same notebooks, the rambling, sort of stuttering notebooks that Nip Tuck read you about earlier in the book here. Diamond asked if he thought that what he had done helped things, and Sirhan said, quote, "I'm not proud of what I did," unquote. "What do you mean you're not proud of it?" Diamond asked him. "You believe in your cause, don't you?" Sirhan had been contacted by Arab sympathizers and others who insisted that the reason he'd killed Kennedy was out of sympathy for the PLO. "I have no exact knowledge, sir, that this happened yet. It's all in my mind, but goddammit, when my body played with it, I couldn't understand it. I still don't believe it. My body outsmarted my brain, I guess." "What did your body do?" Diamond asked. "Pulled that trigger," Sirhan said. "Does your body remember it, even if your mind doesn't?" "I don't give a damn, sir, in a way. Now I don't even care," Sirhan said. Diamond asked Sirhan if he'd thought about suicide. "Hell no," Sirhan said. "I couldn't do that." Then Diamond expressed a thought which contained a significant Freudian slip. "Why didn't you turn the gas on yourself? Why didn't you turn the gun on yourself after you killed Kennedy?" Recall, interrupting here, that many subjects of the CIA and military mind control programs had been trained to commit suicide, as we discussed in connection with De Mohrenschildt, as we're going to look at again in connection with Candy Jones, the courier mentioned earlier. Sirhan waved his hand in front of his face. "It was all mixed up, like a dream," unquote. Diamond hypnotized Sirhan on 6 of 8 visits. At one point, reliving the killing, Sirhan grabbed at his belt on the left side. Until then, police had no idea where he'd carried the weapon. Under hypnosis, Sirhan also created writings similar to those in his notebooks. In one session, Diamond had Sirhan climb the bars of his cell like a monkey. After he'd been brought out of trance, Sirhan explained the reason for his climb. He said he was only getting exercise. Then Diamond played the tape to prove to Sirhan that he, Diamond, had given the instructions to Sirhan to climb the cage, but Sirhan denied that he'd done it because he'd been hypnotized. At the trial, Dr. Diamond, acting as the director of Sirhan's defense, testified that Sirhan was a paranoid schizophrenic. Keep that in mind now. I'll read that last sentence again because this is central to the whole argument here. At the trial, Dr. Diamond, acting as the director of Sirhan's defense, testified that Sirhan was a paranoid schizophrenic. His testimony was supported by several other doctors who had examined the psychiatric evidence obtained from tests, interviews, and hypno-interviews conducted by Diamond. Dr. Diamond did not consider that Sirhan had been other than self-programmed. Having worked for the Army Medical Corps in World War II, he did not realize that the U.S. cryptocracy could develop mind control and use it to control the political destiny of the nation. Sirhan was given yet another battery of tests by Dr. Eric Marcus, a court-appointed psychiatrist for the defense. Among the tests was the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, the MMPI, which contains more than 500 questions requiring true-false answers. Psychologists interpret the answers to the MMPI according to a set of statistical norms. 2 of Sirhan's non-responses were significant, since usually non-responses are considered to be more important than the yes-no responses. The questions Sirhan did not respond to were, number 291, "At one or more times in my life, I felt that someone was making me do things by hypnotizing me." And 293, "Someone has been trying to influence my mind."
Okay. Continuing on a little further on in Walter Bowert's book, and again, after Sirhan has gone to trial, been convicted, and in the words of Walter Bowert, quickly put away for life, he goes on to talk about some of the experiences that Sirhan had with other hypnotists and hypnosis while in prison. And it says as follows: "There were those, however, who refused to let the matter rest. In 1973, while Sirhan sat in prison, Dr. Edward Simpson, the San Quentin prison psychiatrist, submitted an affidavit to the California courts requesting that Sirhan be granted a new trial and that the Robert Kennedy case be reopened. Dr. Simpson testified that the, quote, expert psychiatric psychological testimony at Sirhan's trial was full of numerous factual errors and misleading to the jury. Quote, most of the doctors testifying, Simpson said, saw their role as proving why Sirhan killed Kennedy, which required a focus on pathology, mental illness, that I found does not exist. They failed to consider the real facts in a more objective light, and failed to consider the possibility clearly suggested by the ballistic testimony and Sirhan's own testimony under close scrutiny.